Good morning, or afternoon, actually. Welcome to another exciting session of mass media history. Being such a lovely spring day, my associate has found a new friend that she's playing with out in the yard, and she's allowed to do so. I have like real chipmunks too, but she prefers this one, and so do I. Anyway, you enjoy playing with Chippy there. We will start shortly. Okay, you go play with the chipmunk. Anyway, what we have this week, we will be we do have a homework, 19th century unintended consequences. 19th century communication technology and the camera changed what we do and how we do it. New technologies have unintended consequences. The printing press gave us the Protestant Reformation and the ability to remember the discovery of the New World. And scientists who came up with internet certainly didn't consider cyberbullying. So consider the unintended consequence of any communication technology. Talk first about the technology and what it is and its intended effects, and then say the unintended consequences. Keep it focused. I'm accepting drafts through tomorrow. I've gotten several. The biggest issue that has come up is people will talk about social media and social problems. That's really kind of broad. There's different kinds of social media. You know, you have TikTok has a different problem than Facebook. Not all social media is the same, or Instagram. So focus on a social media and then a specific social problem, cyberbullying, privacy, addiction, sexual examples, fake news, and crazy, nutty misinformation. I hear all the time about things that are totally untrue, about how the Democrats are running a pedophile ring, how Obama is actually some sort of Muslim antichrist. I hear weird stuff all the time. Anyway, so pick a social medium, pick a problem. Not all social media and not all problems. That's the single biggest thing I'm seeing in the drafts. Okay, so far so good. Again, through tomorrow at about 4-ish, I will be accepting drafts. Okay. Speaking of things and unintended consequences, let's look at photography. Another one of those new things. What differences does this make? Revolutionary War veterans. I like this one because look at, you think of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin. Look at, these are real people who survived into the photographic era that fought in the revolution. They're real people. They're not paintings. That's what photography gives us, reality. Here are some of the earliest photos in the United States. Washington, D.C. See, here's the Capitol being built. Life in the 1840s. These are, a lot of these are from Pennsylvania. But yeah, real people in real places, not just drawings. Oh, okay. Riots. Let's see some. There's a couple more in here. I want to get the. Okay, the guy on the $50 bill as a young man, right there. He's a real person. Here's just Mexican-American War. Soldiers leaving for a war, the Mexican War. Looks like we have some people of color back there. So they're real people. This is what we get from photography. It's real. See? It makes things more real and it brings us emotion. You can talk about a picture. We can talk about somebody. You can describe a battle. You can describe a tragedy. But when you see that picture, it's OMG. Photos make us real.
This is a quick look at how photography has developed. Photography is hinged on the discovery that if you poke a hole in the wall of a darkroom, you create camera obscura. Light passing through the hole is projected upside down and retains color and perspective. The first historical mentions of camera obscura in pinhole photography are by ancient philosophers Mauzi, Aristotle, and Alhazen. In 1490, Leonardo da Vinci records detailed descriptions of camera obscura and uses it to trace stuff. By the 1700s,
this is a very common technology that a lot of painters, a lot of the Dutch painters like Rembrandt and Bruegel, they use the camera obscura. They would trace the picture and make it accurate, but then fill in the light and shadow with their painting.
Camera obscura devices are common, and there's evidence to suggest artists like Rembrandt, Vermeer, and Caravaggio use them. Sketchy. In 1724, Johann Heinrich Schulze discovers that substances mixed with silver nitrate react to light. Sadly, the images fade soon after. Until one day in 1826, the world's first photograph is taken by Joseph Nicephore Niepce in France using a procedure called heliography.
There it is. I think it took like 8 hours to project that into the camera oscura. And then what he did is he took out the plate and burned it to etch the image into a metal plate. This is the first surviving photograph, and it now lives at the University of Texas at Austin.
Voila! This exposure takes several days, and you can see the sun lights up both sides of the building. After his death, Niepce's partner Louis Daguerre continues his work and creates the first practical photographic process in 1833, the daguerreotype. In 1839, the French government buys and declares the daguerreotype free to the world.
Now, this is why we remember the daguerreotype and then not the Niepce type, because even though Niepce came up with it, Louis Daguerre not only perfected it, he promoted it. He got all the French scientists together at l'École Française, the French school. He demonstrated it and said, voila, photography. And then he let everybody use it, and everybody started using the daguerreotype.
This is when cool stuff starts happening. Like the first photo of a human. Although this exposure lasted around 7 minutes, a man was getting his shoes polished and was standing perfectly still, thus making history. This was also the first photo with soul.
By the way, look how sharp the image is, how well in focus this building is. The optics have gotten no better in 200 years, or nearly 200 years. It's just that the photography has gotten faster, and the process has gotten, again, faster and easier.
And of course, the world's first selfie is taken by a guy named Robert Cornelius. And human's gonna human. It wouldn't take long for nude photography to kick off too.
Yep, real quick.
In 1840, Henry Fox Talbot unveils the calotype, a process based on negatives that allows for paper copies to be made. However, Talbot tried to charge license fees for the calotype, so it didn't really catch on. Compared to Daguerre, whose name is now one of 72 names inscribed on the Eiffel Tower, Talbot spent his life fighting lawsuits and eventually gave up on photography.
We will see
You could
more
say
of that.
Talbot became a bit negative in the end. It's also important to mention the contribution of Sir John Herschel, who published many essential research papers and coined the term photography, from the Greek words of light in drawing. By the 1850s, mobile photo studios were all the rage because photos had to be developed on site. Exposure times were about 3 minutes long, so people used neck braces and drugs to keep still. It's also why nobody smiled in early photos. What could be the world's first Photoshop occurs in 1861. The head of Abraham Lincoln is placed on a more noble body. The world's first color photograph is also produced. It's of a bow. In 1871, Richard Leach Maddox, who had an outstanding mustache, invents the gelatin dry plate. This means smaller cameras and no tripods necessary. Great success, old chap. Now, here's a cool story, bro. In order to settle the debate of whether all 4 of a horse's hooves ever simultaneously leave the ground, Englishman Edward Muybridge sets up 12 cameras with wire triggers in the path of a galloping horse. The world's first photo sequence proves that they do. In 1885, George Eastman, founder of Eastman Kodak, invents roll film, the first handheld camera.
And we called it the Kodak Company and not the Eastman Company because he's sitting around with his camera going, what do I call the company? Kodak. It is the sound of a camera shutter clicking.
The Kodak goes on sale in 1888. Why Kodak? Because Eastman just liked the letter K. The Kodak came preloaded with 100 exposures that needed to be sent back to the factory for processing and reloading when the roll was finished. Eastman takes mass market photography a step further in the early 1900s with the Brownie, an affordable box camera that introduces the concept of the snapshot. Light's employee Oscar Barnack builds the revolutionary 35mm Leica 1, which goes into production in 1925. The camera allows photographers to go mobile and capture the moment. Some of the most iconic images in history would later be taken on Leicas. The first single-lens reflex SLR camera arrives in 1949. And the first digital image is created from a scan in 1957. However, digital cameras would only arrive a little later, in 1975, when Steve Sasson, a young engineer working for Eastman Kodak, invents the first digital camera.
Just died this year.
But nobody at Kodak is interested in digital. Who wants to see their photos on a TV? Why change the profitable film photography formula? Too late. Kodak only later switches to digital in 2004 and files for bankruptcy in 2012.
Yep.
The digital revolution begins in the 90s. DSLRs, point and shoots. Photography had never been more accessible. Well, until the first mobile phone with a camera came out in 2000. Game changer. 15 years later, and modern smartphones now have insanely powerful cameras. In just seconds, we are able to capture every moment and share it online. Photography has become a global passion and has truly brought the world closer together.
There you go. In our lifetimes, it's totally changed. Now, anybody could take pictures anytime, and whoever thought it would be on the phone. So you can see how that's gone and how that changed how we looked at the world. We will go back and we'll show you how did we look at things, makes things more real, gives you that emotion, captures a moment in time. Here are that one died. These, both of them died. Oh, well.
Oh,
look at this. Again, you see real.
Oh,
One thing we talk
freedom.
about enslaved people a lot.
Oh,
Look at that. That's real, folks.
Oh, freedom
That's real.
over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave. and go home to my Lord and be free.
Like I told you, emotion and reality. That's what photography gives us. Anyway, back to the 19th century. Slideshow. We did the high-speed press and the telegraph. And the photography, and now the Civil War. Look at the difference the media made in the Civil War. Listen to this one.
The Civil War was fought in 10,000 places, at Big Bend, Big Sandy, and the Big Sunflower River. From Bunker Hill, West Virginia, and Blue Springs, Tennessee, and Cairo, Illinois, to Golgotha Church, Georgia, and Christiansburg, Kentucky. At Citrus Point on the Cimarron River, and along Cowskin Bottom. At Pebbly Run and La Glorieta Pass, and Gettysburg.
I think if I had my choice of all the moments to be present at in that war period, it would be at Gettysburg during Lincoln's delivery of his speech. Maybe to have seen him craft those beautiful words, his marvelous healing words, and then deliver them. They were for everyone for all time. They subsumed the entire war and all in it. It showed his compassion for everyone, his love for his people. That's what I'd like to be.
On November 19th, Lincoln traveled to Gettysburg to dedicate the new Union Cemetery. The featured speaker was Edward Everett of Massachusetts, a diplomat, clergyman, and celebrated orator. The president had been invited almost as an afterthought to offer a few appropriate remarks. Everett spoke for not quite 2 hours. Then Lincoln rose. A local photographer took his time focusing. Presumably, the president could be counted on to go on for a while. But he spoke just 269 words. He started off by reminding his audience that just 87 years had passed since the founding of the nation. And then he went on to embolden the Union cause with some of the most stirring words ever spoken. Lincoln was heading back to his seat before the photographer could open the shutter.
He felt that he had failed, that it was a poor speech, that the people didn't like it. It was so brief, less than 2 minutes. He felt that he had failed. Layman, his friend Ward Layman, was sitting next to him on the stand. When he sat down, there was just a sprinkling of applause. And he said, "Layman, that speech won't scowl. That's what you say about a plow in the prairies when the mud doesn't come off it."
The cheek of every American must tingle with shame as he reads the silly, flat, dishwatery utterances of the man who has to be pointed out to intelligent foreigners as the President of the United States. Chicago Times.
Dear Mr. President, I should be glad if I could flatter myself that I came as near to the central idea of the occasion in 2 hours as you did in 2 minutes. Edward Everett.
You know what the difference it made and what it had to do with the media? Anybody? Everyone thought that the speech was a dud. What does this have to do with the media? Wasn't much live. Edward Everett went on and on like a preacher. It's great live, but When people read the Gettysburg Address in the paper, 200 words, 260 words, fits the newspaper, fits a magazine just right. When you read it, it's a whole nother animal. That's what it has to do with the media. Something that doesn't work live can work really well in print.
77 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing
All men, black, white, and women now too, but all people. Enslaved, free, black, white, yellow are all equal. That's a big one.
whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met here on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of it as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that their nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they have thus far so nobly carried on. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead, we take increased devotion to that cause for which they here gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
The government, and I know a lot of people hate the government, but it's about the government, about the principles of people who are equal. That's what people fought and died for. And we cannot forget that these days. It is about the government and how America is the government, and that we're imperfect, but the people who lived and died right behind our campus are fighting for the idea that all people are created equal. Black, white, Muslim, Buddhist, conservative, and liberal. And we cannot forget that. And these days, we have too many people, and I'm sorry if I'm on my soapbox, too many people who hate each other and hate the government. That is not what America is about. And that's what we remember. All right, off the soapbox. Back to the Civil War.
With online newspapers, social networks, and television, less and less people open a newspaper to catch up on current events. During the Civil War, for the more public news, newspapers were used. The newspaper industry itself evolved during the war and grew to be what it is today. Since the Civil War was supposed to be a short war, the demand for news was massive for the soldiers and the citizens. The people wanted to know how their side was doing. In order to meet the demand, rotary presses were invented. This type
The
of
high-speed press, everyone's reading about it.
printing press could provide papers for a whole city opposed to a whole town in one night. Another way that information was spread was through photography. The camera was just emerging at the time of the Civil War.
Oh, you know where that photo was taken? At whatever knob that is, right in downtown Chattanooga. So here we are. The photos show where we are.
The process of taking and developing a picture took time and skill. It required two men quickly mixing trays of chemicals and pouring them over sheets of glass. Cameras were very large and would be set onto specially built wagons. Photography was a way for people to see the battlefield from a safe distance and preserve the historic scenes.
Yep. It's not just talk anymore. You can see what things really look like.
The telegraph was the quickest way for information to be shared throughout the country. A battle in Georgia could be reported to Washington in a matter of minutes. Telegraph operators would follow the troops to the battlefront and set up telegraph poles and wires right where the action was happening.
And our local person, Nathan Bedford Forrest, would follow the Union troops and cut the damn things down. He understood the importance of communication.
Using Morse code, a trained operator would send and interpret messages. This system allowed leaders to make decisions and relay them to the generals or commanders much quicker than a messenger could ride the message.
And Lincoln had a command center, communication center in the White House, so he could see what's going on in Tennessee and Georgia and Virginia all at once and coordinate the troops. The Confederates didn't do that.
Airplanes were not invented at the time of the Civil War. The only way to see your enemy from above was in a hot air balloon. These early balloons could rise up to 5,000 feet in the air and were often tethered to the ground. The balloonist would communicate enemy positions and camps to the ground, and the information would be telegraphed back to main camp. Unfortunately, before the end of the war, the balloon program disbanded due to financial reasons. Balloons were a safer way to scout out an area, but were expensive to build.
Speaking of unintended consequences, things had to sit still. Things to take a good picture. What sits still? Dead bodies. Governments try to build support for the war effort. This is the pictures they brought back. People turned against the war. Anyway.
In over 100 years, we've never missed a payment. Guaranteed monthly income for life.
It will become Lincoln's nerve center in this war. And at its heart, a simple device that will transform how this war is fought and won. The telegraph. The invention of Morse code in 1844 turns the telegraph into America's first tool of mass communication. Quickly encoded, the basic system of dots and dashes sealed for brief messages. Like Twitter today, it needs just seconds to send them and transcribe them. Where messengers previously took days, on horseback, over hundreds of miles, and across every kind of terrain. Now, the country's 50,000-mile telegraph network means communication is almost instantaneous. As telegraph poles snake out alongside the railroad lines, this vast country begins to shrink.
Yep, here we are, right here. I guess this is Chattanooga, more or less. Goes right up to DC. Look at the network. You can go to Arkansas and St. Louis, Ohio, everything going on. Not much in the Confederacy.
It will transform the nature.
Here we are. Here's Chattanooga. From Chattanooga all the way to DC. And from the Midwest, here's Chicago, St. Louis, Ohio. So they knew what was going on in DC, but not in Richmond.
Of this war, as information and decisions can flow backwards and forwards at lightning speed.
It became kind of the early version of email. Suddenly it was possible to get a message to somebody from St. Louis, to get a message to New York in a shockingly short amount of time.
Lincoln immediately realizes the telegraph's potential as a weapon of war. He insists on the installation of telegraph lines directly into the War Department. He quickly acts to place all telegraph facilities in the Union under military control.
Of course, you can say then he's controlling the media. That all of the messages they could censor. A lot of people said Lincoln was a dictator and he was not a democratic small d leader, that he controlled the media. No one complained, but, well, a lot of people did. But still, he's not remembered today, but yeah, he controlled the media and censored it.
The telegraph office becomes the central hub of Lincoln's war operation, command and control center. He even takes to sleeping here at busy times. The telegraph office manager, David Homer Bates, describes how Lincoln obsesses over every scrap of news from the front, sometimes reading dispatches word by word as they are deciphered.
Lincoln's habit was to go immediately to the drawer each time he came into our room and read over the telegrams. beginning at the top until he came to the one he had seen on his previous visit.
So he and his generals knew where everybody was all the time, whether or not they were here in Chattanooga or in South Carolina or in Mississippi or Virginia. He was able to coordinate the movements of all the troops. Grant was originally in Quartermaster Corps. He was a supply officer. He knew how to move horses and food and ammunition. So you have all of that logistical coordination through the communications of the telegraph, and the Confederates just didn't have that kind of ability. Lee was all alone in Virginia while Bragg was down here. You had no coordination between the two. Lincoln was able to coordinate armies all over.
The North's telegraph network spreads its tentacles far and wide, sucking information back to Lincoln and his commanders in
I just think it's really cool that Chattanooga stands out so much in this video.
Washington. It gives him a vast strategic overview, providing him an unrivaled insight into his commander's tactical thinking.
And there you go. Lincoln and the Union had more telegraph wires, paper. They also enforced the Alien and Sedition Act. Anybody they didn't like or suspected of working for the South, they put in jail without charge or trial. So much for smart communication, but not much for free press. So think about that. Anyway, we'll talk about new technologies next week. And the week after that, we will have a test. Anyway, the week after that, so that would be the week of the 22nd, we'll do the next test. We'll finish up the 19th century next week. Anyway, questions? Stop share. Okay, well, otherwise, I'll post this shortly. I hope you have a lovely weekend, and I'll be reading essays through the weekend. Talk to you soon. Have a great, lovely spring weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.